All right. Welcome, everybody. We are going to welcome our guest speaker for the night. Morgan Jones is a passionate advocate and educator dedicated to improving outcomes for students with disabilities. As the mother of four, including a child with autism and a child with severe profound disabilities caused by CFC syndrome, Morgan brings both personal insight and professional expertise to her work. Her journey began as a parent navigating the complexities of the IEP process, an experience that revealed the urgent need for stronger communication, collaboration, and support between families and schools. Today, Morgan partners with educators, school leaders, and communities to develop inclusive practices, strengthen IEP implementation, and ensure every child, regardless of ability, has access to a meaningful education. Known for her ability to connect lived experience with actionable strategies, Morgan inspires audiences to rethink special education not as a legal requirement, but as an opportunity to unlock the potential in every learner. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Ashley. Um, I hope everybody is doing well tonight. I am a conversationalist, as Ashley said. So, y'all, as we go through this tonight, I know that the IEP process can be heavy. It's a lot. It's a lot to process through. So please feel free to ask questions. That's the only way we'll learn. And I will be honest with you, and I tell this to every participant that sits in any session that I do. I don't know it all. And I am one to admit when I don't know it all, but I know people that know people. And so if I don't know it, I can find somebody who does. Ashley, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay. All right. Can everybody see my screen? Pretty good. Perfect. All right. So, y'all, as Ashley said, we're going to kind of hit on a little bit of all the things when it comes to special education. So, we're going to talk about some timelines. We're going to talk about some terms. We're going to hopefully have some conversations of transparency and a little bit with some Q&A. So, as we go through this, again, it's just a very basic rundown of some important things that pretty much every parent should know. And as we go through it, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to ask. You feel free to unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. Ashley, with me presenting, I may not always be able to see the chat. So if you don't mind interrupting me and just letting me know that we have a chat or a question. Without further ado, I want to introduce myself a little bit more. Even though Ashley did give you a really long rundown of who I am, honestly, these people on the screen are who make me what I am. You heard a little bit about our story. I used to be a social worker long before I was a special education anything. But I shifted gears because of that really handsome fella right here on the left of the screen. He was in second grade, and I got tired of not understanding what was being said to me on the other side of the IEP table. And I knew that if I felt like this, there was other families who also felt like this. So I wanted to make sure that I did my part in stepping up and trying to help families who were like my own, who were struggling to understand what everything meant when it came to the IEP process. Now, fast forward, my two daughters, they are lovely. They're as equally as sassy as their mom is, or at least that's what my husband says. But those two, while they do not have any severe, profound deficits, they do struggle significantly with reading. So that has been another sitting across another IEP table and advocating on behalf of them to get them what they needed. And then came along our sweet CFC baby. And I'm pretty sure the rest of you can absolutely understand where I'm coming from when I say he has been one of the biggest blessings that God has ever given to us. He has taught me so much about appreciating the little things and appreciating the milestones and just encompassing gratitude for what life is. He has taught me to view things from a different perspective and even see things from the perspective of parents who when they finally make it to the IEP table, why they're so angry. Because Lord knows I have been angry a couple of times the past 3 years with doctors who don't hear me and they're not listening. And I know that there's so many families out there who have felt this same feeling that I deal with. So it's such a blessing to be able to live this experience and be able to advocate for families and children of when it comes to IEPs, and helping teachers really see how to see our families with a positive light and know that they can help make a difference in the lives of our children. So today I hope to share some information with you that is helpful. I hope that it gives you a little bit more encouragement to make sure that you're advocating. And if you ever need help with advocating for your kids or have questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Like I said, if I don't know the answer, I will find somebody who does. All right. So let's jump in to some IEP terminology. Now, one of the first things that I noticed when I joined the team of special education was I had quite a few terms that I needed to learn. And the thing about it is most of our families don't always understand what these terms mean. So I'm just going to kind of run through them. And of course, if you have questions about them, do not hesitate to ask. So of course, we start out with IEP. So IEP just is the term that means individualized education program. Now, your child has a whole evaluation process that they have to go through to get an IEP. Now, this document is what they would consider a legally binding document, meaning that it's something that federally the law says, hey, they have this individualized educational program and you have to follow it because you said in this IEP meeting that this child needed it. So the IEP is there to help provide services and supports to your child to help them be successful in what we would call their least restrictive environment, which you can see right here on the screen that says LRE. So your least restrictive environment is where our students are allowed to take part in educational activities, whether it's within the instructional class or maybe through resource activities such as physical education, art, music, that kind of thing. So offering this opportunity for our children with disabilities to take part in educational activities with children who do not have diagnosed or documented disabilities. Now, the reason why all of this was important is because our students and our children are allowed to have, or they require access to, a free and appropriate public education according to the federal law for IDEA. Now, the IEP is supposed to open up the door of opportunity to allow them to get that free, appropriate public education with supports in their least restrictive environment. It's a whole lot of jargon to say we want to include students with disabilities in the classroom with people of the same age or around the same age with and without disabilities. Now, that is just your environmental explanation of the least restrictive environment and why we have IEPs based off of a FAPE. Now, diving a little bit deeper into the IEP, you start to have different components that make up your child's IEP. One of the very large pieces is the development of the PLAF, which is your present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Basically, what that means is they are looking at how your child is performing when compared to same age peers and their non-disabled peers at the grade level that they should be at. Now, sometimes, to be very honest, sometimes the PLAF can feel like one of the heaviest parts of the IEP because we have to have a real discussion about the implications or the impact of that child's disability characteristics on their access to the general education curriculum. Again, fancy jargon just to say, we need to know what's going on with your child and how it actually impacts their learning when it comes to learning anything in the classroom. Now, for our students that are depending on their disability, depending on what the impact is, and depending on what their unique needs are, the IEP committee develops goals for them to work towards. Now, the goals that we develop in the IEP must be standards based, meaning that if that student is a 6th grade student, then that IEP goal is supposed to be written at a 6th grade level. Now, this is where a lot of people tend to get upset or feel defeated. And I want to tell you that that's not the place. We can make it through because the goal is to help them get there. That's the goal. I know sometimes it might seem like we're never going to get there, but we will absolutely get them there. It's going to take them some time. And with a well thought out and devised IEP with great goals, we can get them there. So when you have those measurable annual goals, that is the goal that's going to help them start to reach what would be considered grade level content. Now, in the IEP, you have your goals, and then you have like I call them mini goals, but they're really called STIOs, which are short-term instructional objectives. Now, these little objectives are to be completed every 9 weeks, 18 weeks, 27 weeks. Now, it can be broken up different than that. It really just depends on what your school district says, hey, this is what we will allow for objectives. So just for simplicity, we're going to stick with 9 weeks, 18 weeks, 27 weeks, and then 36 weeks. But those STIOs is where we really bridge the gap. So while we're trying to get them to our grade level goal, those STIOs will help us bridge the gap. So if you think about it from this perspective, if we have a child who is going to the 2nd grade and they need to learn how to do multi-digit addition. Well, we can't just start them out at multi-digit addition. We have to look and say, do they understand numbers? And if they don't, that's our starting point. Can they add single digits? And if they can, great. Okay, let's move to the next skill. Can they add double digits? And if the answer is no, they are not successful at that, then that might be our starting point. So we have to use those STIOs to bridge the gaps to help them learn how to perform on grade level. And I hope that makes sense. And if that does not make sense, please do not hesitate to let me know. I really firmly believe that our children grow and progress the most when we can have sufficient goals being developed to help them be successful. Now, as we move forward in the IEP, we look at things like modifications and accommodations. Modifications changes what the student is required to learn, while accommodations may change how they learn it, but accommodations also look like giving them support services that is going to help them access it. So like a student that might struggle with reading fluency or decoding to be able to read, they might get additional time. They might have somebody that reads aloud to them. They might have somebody that's like a peer buddy. That would be an allowable accommodation in the classroom to help them reach grade level standards. Whereas a modification changes the expectation. So they might be taught about it here, but it's going to be modified down to a level that they can perform at, or their instructional level, if you will. Now, do I have any questions? I do see the chat here. Let's see. That's a great question. Thank you, Lynette, for asking that. So she asked, to achieve these goals, do you recommend working from home, or how can we help them achieve these goals? As somebody who believes in learning doesn't stop when we leave the school, I think that we really can help teachers and our children succeed and reach these goals when we help work with them at home. So it might look like contacting whoever is monitoring these goals at school and ask them, hey, what can I do to help at home that's going to help her bridge this gap? And they should willingly offer up different ideas for you to work with them. Now, it also looks different depending on the situation for your child. If that child is homebound, therefore the services aren't as hands-on in the school system, then it might look different for you, and you might end up having to work with them more frequently at home, simply because they're not in the school setting. Now, if they're in the school setting, like a traditional student, then I would absolutely reach out to your child's special education teacher and find out where they're at with working on those goals and what you might can do to help support that goal at home. Because it might just look like working through identifying different things by pointing to stuff. It might be reading, it might be math skills, it might be social emotional skills. There, it really is uniquely based off of what our children need. I hope that answered your question. That was a great question. All right, so if you've ever sat in an IEP meeting, you have heard about the procedural safeguards. Now, the procedural safeguards, it is the book of all books, but it can be a lot to digest. Now, I'm not going to dive into it so deeply that I lose you all, because it can be quite the total snooze fest, and I don't want that for any of us to go ahead and take a nap. But what I do want us to do is talk about the importance of this document. This document, or more like a book, if you will, gives you a multitude of information that you can utilize as a parent of a child with disabilities. Now, you have certain rights as a parent, and this procedural safeguard is going to outline all of those rights in extreme detail. But this is just a quick snippet, shortcut look at it. You, first and foremost, you have the right to participate. So in every IEP meeting that your child has, you have the right to say, I want to take part in that. You have the right to say, hey, I would like to have an IEP meeting. That is your right as a parent. You have the right to receive prior written notice. We're going to talk a little bit more about prior written notice as far as like where it falls into the timeline of things. But before they do anything with your child as far as services, after IEP meetings, after eligibility meetings, pretty much anytime they're about to do something with your child regarding special education services, they're supposed to let you know, hey, here's what we're about to do. Hey, here's what we changed in that IEP meeting. Hey, here's what we have going on based off of the information that we previously discussed or what we just discussed. You have the right to be notified of your rights. So schools are legally required to provide parents with their rights in writing. So you have the right to get this book every single time you have a meeting. Now, depending on the reason for the IEP meeting, it is best practices that a SPED teacher offers this book every time you have an IEP meeting. However, it's required of them to give it to you at least once a year. And generally, you're going to get this around the annual review time. Anytime that you've requested a independent evaluation and they disagree on it, then they have to make sure to offer you this procedural safeguard to let you know that you have rights to then pursue other measures. You have a right to access their records. Now, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which is better known as FERPA, it protects your child's records and it limits who is allowed to access them. But you are allowed to access your child's records and review them pretty much at any given time. You have the right to a dispute resolution. And I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the due process timeline. So we're going to talk about that in a few more minutes. But this book, The Procedural Safeguards, is really going to give you dispute resolution options and tell you what your rights are and how you can pursue that. And finally, a timely response. Now, I wish that I was able to give you specific timelines for absolutely everything, but every state in the United States is allowed to come up with their own timeline so long as they fall in the timeline given by IDEA. So while some of these school districts or states might say, hey, you only have 14 days to do this, other states might say, well, we're going to give them 30. So just know that some of these timelines and these timely responses are going to vary state by state. All right. So here's some more terms, and these are, it depends on the situation, whether or not you're going to actually hear these pop up in IEP meetings. So we just briefly talked about FERPA. And again, that is just saying, hey, your children have rights to have their educational records protected. And there's only certain people who can check them out. And you are one of those people. In the IEP, you will have people considered related services, which might look like our OT, PT, speech therapist. It might look like a vision therapist. It might look like a counselor, maybe even a nurse. It really just depends on uniqueness to that student and what they need in order to be successful. Oh, excuse me. Of course, we have the procedural safeguards. We just kind of talked about it as well. Your special education teacher, every time you have an IEP meeting, they should at least go over your procedural safeguards with you. And if they're not, just ask them, hey, could you cover it with me? Just to make sure that you guys are all on the same page. You have, of course, the extended school year. So extended school year is what a lot of people consider summer school. Now with ESY, extended school year, you have a whole IEP meeting just for ESY, separate from everything else. That is a whole meeting by itself. And during that meeting, you're going to have the discussion about whether or not the data supports that child attending summer school or ESY. Some of those things might look like when your child gets ready to go home on a break, they will do progress monitoring prior to that break. And when they come back to school, they will check to see, did this child lose any of the skills that we taught prior to the break? And if they did, then they have to look and see, how long does it take them to regain those skills that they lost? That would be considered regression recoupment. So they have to qualify under regression recoupment, or there's other options for them that is often determined by the IEP committee, whether it is critical point instruction 1 or critical point instruction 2. There's 2 different options there, and they vary in what they're looking for. And then you have what would be considered extenuating circumstances. And all of this is sometimes very subjective, it feels like, because some kids do have extenuating circumstances, while others might need ESY based off of those critical points of instruction. We might be in a critical point of their instruction where we might be in the middle of potty training, because that is a skill that we absolutely need in order to be functional and more independent. So we might be right in the middle of unlocking and having a breakthrough with our potty training goal, and then we're getting ready to go home for summer. That's a critical point of instruction. If we stop offering that instruction, then they could regress, which we don't want that. So they might qualify under those critical points of instruction. Or again, maybe under that extenuating circumstance. So there are various different ways that your child could qualify to receive services over the summer. And generally speaking, this may not be the case always, but typically for our students who are who have a more severe, profound disability, they oftentimes will offer it to them so that we can continue getting those services to continue to make progress towards mobility or anything else that's going to help with that functional ability. For transition plan, now for transition, that age range is going to vary state to state. Now, IDEA says, the federal law says that we have to start this transition process by the time they're 16. So, one of the things that you're going to want to make sure is check out the laws in your state and see what they say about when you should start transition. In the state of Mississippi, we start at the age of 14. We begin that process of trying to see what do our students want to be and what do they want to do when they're out of high school. And we try to help develop post-secondary goals that are manageable and capable of possibly being reached if we can work with those goals and bridge the gaps that we might have. All right. Now, I know that's a lot of information, y'all. So, again, if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. All right. So, let's talk about some important timelines. Now, if you've had a child within the special education world for a minute, then you have probably not had to do Child Find in quite a while. So with Child Find, this is when a parent comes and says, hey, I think my child needs to be tested for a learning disability. Or your child is coming from Part C, which is that first steps or early intervention for our 0 to 3-year-olds. So your child might be coming from that age group and coming into the school. And we have to do what is called the Child Find process. So a parent can request that their child receive testing. Now, this varies again state by state, so check your state for the exact timeline. But a parent request can be given, and in the state of Mississippi, they have 14 days to acknowledge that request and schedule a meeting. Now, again, that might vary state by state, so just double check that. Because if a school district is given an option to extend it, just know they are going to get most of them are going to use up every day allowable. Once you've given that parent request, they have to set up what is called a MET team meeting, which is a multidisciplinary evaluation team. And typically the people involved in that would be you as the parent, a general education teacher, special education teacher, and a school representative, probably your principal, maybe a lead teacher if they have been designated to be that person in the MET team. But there are certain people who have to be present. Oftentimes there'll be a special education case manager there because they also help set up and schedule any evaluations that might be coming down the pipeline. Now, speaking of evaluations, at this MET meeting, they will look at all sorts of information. There will be 5,822 questions being asked of you. It can be quite overwhelming. You will have to give permission for possibly looking at medical records. You will have to give a rundown of medical information for that child's history, your medical history, your pregnancy, all of those things. Go deep into that to help determine, and they're going to look at data too from the school and say, hey, does this child meet the criteria to be tested and have a comprehensive evaluation conducted? If the MET team meeting says yes, they do, most of the time, they will go ahead and get your signature to say it's okay to do testing on this child. Once you've signed that document that says, yes, they can test my child, they have 60 days to get that done. Now, this again might be a date that might be different within your school district or within your state. The federal guideline says they have 60 days to get this evaluation completed. Now, once we've completed that evaluation, we start the eligibility process. Now, the eligibility process we have more meetings. If you haven't noticed yet, we meet until we just can't meet anymore when it comes to special education. And that's okay, because collaboration is what helps our special education students thrive and make progress, because we all have to work together to get them what they need. So into the eligibility meeting, we have same process. You have that IEP meeting. It's basically an IEP meeting, very similar to that MET team meeting that we just had. We get together, the psychometrist or the person who is going to discuss the testing results is also there to share information about the outcome of that testing. Now, during this meeting, they will share all of this information, and then that team, that committee will determine what that eligibility ruling will be. Now, there are times where there are no findings of a disability. However, in this situation with our children with CFC syndrome, oftentimes we are going to find that they are eligible. Now, once we get that eligibility ruling, the that eligibility meeting has to be held within 14 days of that comprehensive assessment being completed. So they completed it and they're going to say, hey, we need to have a meeting. Now, they're supposed to give you at least a 7 days notice. However, I do ask that sometimes we give them just a slight bit of grace, because when we are outsourcing psychometrists and all of these things, it can get quite discombobulated. So give them just a little bit of grace, but typically our school districts are going to be really good about meeting these timelines, because the federal law says they have to, or at least they should be given a valiant effort to make sure that we are meeting them. Now, we've had our eligibility meeting. We said, yes, we determined the disability. We've gotten the ruling. So now we need to start the process of developing our initial IEP. Now, oftentimes, this has been my experience as a parent of children with disabilities and as an educator. A lot of school districts are asking IEP members to have 2 meetings, the eligibility meeting, and then turn right back around and do the initial IEP meeting. That can be a lot for everybody involved. So if you don't think that you can handle 2 meetings in one day, you don't have to. You don't have to. You can give yourself some cushion to digest what you just learned in the eligibility meeting. And it also gives that teacher, that SPED teacher, a couple of days to get to know your kid a little bit more, so that they can make sure that when they show up to this initial IEP meeting, that they have some background, personal knowledge of working with your child, and can better adequately create an IEP based off of that child's unique needs. Now, if you have to have them both in the same day, because many districts say, hey, yes, you have to have both in one day, you can tell them to slow down. It's okay to tell them to slow down. It's okay to ask questions. But that initial IEP meeting has to be conducted within 30 days of that eligibility meeting. That's why I said you do have a little bit of cushion to say, hey, can we wait a couple of days before we have another meeting, so that I have time to process everything. Now, once they are determined to be eligible, we've had that initial IEP meeting. This is how annual IEPs will kind of look from then on out. So every year you have an annual IEP that has to be developed. Now, this date will vary based off of how your district does things. Most IEPs are written in what we consider IEP season, which happens anywhere between March and June. So your annual IEP meeting could be within any of those months, depending on the dates in which your school district starts school. Now, before we can just have an IEP meeting, we have a process we have to go through. You have to first get that IEP invitation. Now, on this invitation, it's going to invite you to your child's IEP meeting. On that invitation, you should get it at least 7 days before the meeting. You should have an idea of who's being invited. You should know what time you're supposed to be there. It also gives you the option to be there in person or be there virtually or do it over the phone. And you also have the option to record. If you choose to record, do give your district at least a 24 hours notice so that they can also record, because by law, if you're recording, they also have to record. Now, once we get to the IEP meeting, they should offer you this procedural safeguards, especially if it's the annual IEP or we're doing a reval, those kinds of things. They should offer you a procedural safeguards. It is generally best practice that they discuss the procedural safeguards before every single meeting. Does that mean that they're going to? Not always, but it is a best practice. If you want them to explain it every time, you can ask them to explain the procedural safeguards to you. Now, once we've explained the procedural safeguards, that is when we begin the chance to develop this IEP. Now, here is what I know. I know sometimes, maybe a lot of times, we show up to the IEP committee meeting and we already have an IEP that's been drafted and ready to sign. It's okay to say, hey, let's slow down and read through all of this and give your contributions too. You are vital in the development of IEPs because you can offer insights into those students' preferences, how they prefer to learn, behaviors that might be concerning. Do they have trouble sitting still? Is that something that a teacher needs to be concerned about? Is it something that could impact their learning in the classroom? You have a lot of personal insight on what your child is capable of doing and where they may struggle at as well. So during this annual IEP meeting, that is when you can give all of this information to them. Now, after we have our IEP meeting, you should receive what is called a PWN, or a prior written notice. Oftentimes, they will lump this in at the very end of the meeting, and they'll say, hey, this is what we discussed in the meeting today. Here's your prior written notice. You can sign here to waive your 7 days. You have 7 days after that IEP meeting to say, I want to just wait on these services. Let me digest what just happened before we start. Or you can say, hey, I'll just digest it as we keep going. I'm going to go ahead and sign so that she can get services started. Those are your options. That is what you can choose to do. Now, as the year progresses, it's okay to have more than one IEP meeting. I highly encourage calling an IEP meeting if you feel like your child is not making progress, or you feel like you've noticed something else is going on. If they're not making progress on their annual goals and those STIOs, those short-term instructional objectives, if they're not making progress on those, we should be having IEP meetings to figure out what skill are we missing that we can't reach this skill. So we got to go back and see what is missing so that we can try to figure it out and bridge those gaps. Now, those types of meetings are called review revisions. You will, if you have an IEP meeting to address something throughout the school year, that would be considered a review revision to that IEP. And then that same process is going to start back over. You can't have a review revision IEP meeting without an IEP invitation discussing of the procedural safeguards. The review revision IEP meeting, getting a prior written notice. It's the same process. It's a cycle. Now, because I know sometimes things do not go as planned in these meetings or with our children's education. So we have the very long process of due process. Now, there are various different ways we can go about due processes, which might look like getting a mediator, having an advocate sit in, those kinds of things. But for the formal complaint due process, this is what that would look like. It must be filed within 2 years of the parent's noted concern. So if it happened in the last 2 years and you want to create a formal complaint about it, just know that there is a timeline based off of that. Now, in my research, I did learn that there are other districts and other states that might have a different timeline for this. So I'm not certain if that means that it is a broader time frame, or I would venture to say that it's not a smaller time frame because the federal law says you have 2 years. The school then has to respond to that complaint, and they have 10 days to say, hey, we got your complaint. Here's an idea to remediate it. Let's have a resolution meeting. Within 10 days of getting that complaint, we then have to have a resolution meeting that's done within 15 days of receiving that complaint. So they have 10 days to say, hey, we got your complaint. Then they pretty much have 5 days to say, let's have a meeting to address it. Now, once you have that meeting to address it, oftentimes it will lead to resolution. And if it doesn't, it goes forward to the due process hearing. Now, once it gets to that due process hearing, it could take up to 45 days for you to get a answer from this hearing. And then from that, you can, they will help you determine the next steps. Or if you disagree with it, there's a process that you can go through to appeal what the due process hearing determines. Now, again, I know this is a whole lot of information, a whole lot of timelines. So again, if at any point in time, you guys feel free to ask questions, because getting to that, it's okay to ask questions. When I was a special education teacher, one of the biggest things that I pushed my families to do was to ask questions when they didn't understand something. And still till this day, I'm a question asker. I love to ask questions because I won't know if I don't ask questions. So with that being said, Ashley, if we could go ahead, we can open up the floor for any questions that they may have.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you for that. I know my background is also in special education. And so I'm always here to answer questions as well, but I know Morgan would always be willing to reconnect with you and answer questions if more comes up after today, because it is a lot of terminology and a lot of really stale conversation. But definitely a good resource to have in your pocket. So we have one question right away from Rita. Can you see the chat?
And I can. I'm gonna close out my screen if that's okay. And also, Ashley, if it's okay with you, I will PDF this and send you these timelines, and we can share them out as well. All right. So here we go. What should I expect from reevaluation meeting? How can I advocate that my child receives appropriate services and supports based on his current needs? Last time the services offered didn't fully address his needs. That seems to be a very common situation. You're not alone, first of all, and kudos to you for showing up to these meetings and advocating on his behalf. And Ashley, again, you have just as much knowledge as I do in the SPED world, so feel free to jump in and add to anything that I say that I maybe don't touch on. Okay. My suggestion would be find out, first of all, when they want to have this meeting, and then ask for the data. Ask them what data they're using to determine whether or not this child needs to be reevaluated. Now, during this reevaluation process, typically you're going to get together as the IEP team and determine, does this child require retesting or being reevaluated? Oftentimes our children with significant disabilities, often their disability categories don't change, but that's not to say that they won't change, but often they don't change. But what I don't want you to get lost in is the concern of what the eligibility ruling is. Don't get caught up in what the ruling is. What does he need? What is the disability impacting? Is it short-term memory problems? Is it mobility issues? Is it learning challenges? What is the problem that's keeping him from meeting grade level standard? But then you also have to look at that functional perspective too, because in the functional world, we have to compare our students and our children with disabilities to those without disabilities and see how are they functioning in comparison to those students. That also helps to determine what we need. My suggestion is write down everything that you think that baby needs to be successful. As an IEP committee, they have to hear you. They have to listen. That does not mean they have to say, yes, he can get that. But you are more than welcome to bring to the team ideas that you think would help your child be successful. So if you know at home he likes certain things, and I'm going to be honest with you, this is going to sound silly, but just follow me here. When I was teaching, I had kids that I could not get them to learn. They didn't want to learn because it wasn't fun for them. I literally had to make everything about basketball. So two of my students could learn anything. You might be able to come to the table and say, my child loves this, whatever it is. We can use that to teach him or her to do X, Y, and Z. You can bring that to the team. I promise you, they might look at you a little crazy at first, but they're going to appreciate the fact that you know your child and you're offering up her interests and preferences so that she can learn. Ashley, anything else that you think
Yeah,
might
I
be helpful?
agree with that. I think if you're already at the point where you're either getting reevaluated because it's time to reevaluate, or if they're reevaluating because they found a need to reevaluate, one of the things that I would recommend is just to make sure that I don't know what tools they're going to use or what they're testing specifically.
Right.
Generally, they will have some sort of parent questionnaire. If they're doing things right, they should have some sort of parent questionnaire. Document absolutely everything, because if that information is in the evaluation, they almost just have to address it. So if you're concerned that his needs were not met previously, document it and write it down. And if they're not planning to send home a parent interview or sit down and have a parent interview with you, then maybe request one be part of the evaluation, because then it's documented and then it becomes part of that legal process that they really can't avoid.
Absolutely. We have another question here. And again, this is a very common issue. They have a similar situation with IEP meetings, supposed to have a discussion of goals based on the input from parents and teachers. And it's supposed to be data driven too. So they're supposed to have baseline data that says, here's why they need this goal. Only to find out that the goals are already written out by the teaching staff and told that we'll work on those things you suggested as well, but has less weight than what they have listed. That's a kudos to you for keeping calm, cool, and collected in those moments. One of the things that I will tell you, it is a wonderful thing to have a SPED teacher who shows up with a draft IEP. It is a wonderful thing to have a conversation about those goals and determining whether or not they're actually a need for them. I do appreciate the fact that you are sharing your ideas on goals. My suggestion would be to kindly, as gingerly as you can, just remind them that you would like to collaborate before the development of the IEP if the goals are already going to be on the IEP when you show up to the meeting. So you can say, hey, could we collaborate? Could we have a phone conversation prior to our IEP meeting about what goals the data says that this child needs, as well as ideas that I see coming from the home perspective that might help with whether it be academic or functional. Communication is absolutely key. And generally, most SPED teachers are rolling up to the IEP committee meeting with a draft IEP that is just about ready to sign. And I know that's not right. It's not, but that is the story of the lives of most SPED teachers. But everything that they're talking about goal wise needs to first be discussed in the class. So goals shouldn't be a surprise. They should first be addressed in that present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Why do they need to work on it? If it's not discussed first in the PLAF, it can't be discussed anywhere else on the IEP. So if that's not already completed and there's not justification for the need for those goals, then that conversation has to be had. And I know that it can be a very tender subject. So I get a little passionate. So my voice gets a little carried when I get emotional about anything when it comes to education with my kids. So try to remain calm, because being elevated in a meeting is not going to be a successful meeting for you, nor that teacher, nor is it really going to help our kids. So when you're talking to your child special education teacher, let them know, hey, I would really like to take part in the development of these goals, because they should be including you anyways. But if nothing else, you've now stated, this is my intention. I want to be part of it, so that there is no confusion from that point forward. And if necessary, follow up with an email. I'm all about putting things in writing. And we can do it in a tender, ginger, nice, sweet way. And if you're not sure if it's nice and sweet, throw it in Chat GPT and tell them to make it sweeter. Okay. Because sometimes we do get a little bit passionate, and I know when I'm typing things, my tone comes across different than I really intend it to be. So I hope that helps. Ashley, anything else?
I thought that was great. I think just one thing, just to reiterate to everybody, is IEP meetings are really intimidating. And when you're sitting with a large group of people who are kind of telling you what you maybe already know about your own child, or are telling you all of the things that might be hard to hear about your own child because we're looking at the areas where we need growth.
Yeah.
Just stay confident. You know your child best. It's kind of like going to the doctor. It's an intimidating team, and people come in with a lot of different perspectives. But you know your child best, and if there are things you know that they want to work on, then just speak up. And usually, I think they'll be receptive. If they're not, you can always start talking to administration and ask them, to give you a little bit more of a voice and to speak to that teacher about how you would like to be heard.
Thank you. And yes, valid, all of that. I'm reading this post that Rosemary put in here. Oh, yes. Okay, so you're having some issues with a lot of issues with vision getting access and services. It looks like that, unfortunately, that is a very also very common, because VI teachers and hearing impairment teachers are or specialists in that field. Both of those fields are very hard to come by. Do you have access to, does your state have access to a school for the deaf and blind? If they do, if you do, you might be able to reach out to them and see what services they might be able to offer, or what supports they might be able to offer your child's school district. I know in our state, when it came to my visually impaired students that I service, I had to reach out to the School for the Blind to get their textbooks made, all of that. And I had to do it a year in advance in order to get everything that my students needed for that upcoming school year. I know that that's probably not what you wanted to hear, and I wish that I had the magic wand where I could wave and give every state at least 100 people certified and stuff like that, but I can't. Let's see here. Read Sigils 3. Because this teacher wasn't taking them to the pool. Okay, so in situations like this, my suggestion would be the moment you notice that we're not working towards a goal at all because we're not even getting access to it, such as the swimming pool goal, call an IEP meeting, because they are significantly out of compliance. And they probably knew it too. Like if every 9 weeks, they're supposed to send home a goal sheet that says, hey, your student's making progress towards this. And if they didn't go for half a year, then they sent you at least 2 of them that said your baby was not making progress. They should have done something to address it. So my suggestion would be the next time you feel like we're not making progress, or you don't feel like the data that they're showing you is done with fidelity, call an IEP meeting. You have that right. And you can ask to see the data. Did did I miss them? Okay. Um, working out how to communicate that this is a problem. We're on his body versus emotional regulation. Um, so this is, I feel like this is another common issue for our children who have significant delays and deficiencies when it comes to communication. This is something where you're going to have to, the school and the home team are going to have to come together and say, we need to teach a sign or a signal across the board for him to use to indicate when he's in pain. That way, when he's at school, if he does this signal or he indicates this way, you know it's because he's hurting. Same thing at home. Sometimes we want our children to communicate in a certain way, and they're not always able to communicate in the way that we need them to. I get hollered at by baby Hunter regularly. Like, I mean, just full blown, just screaming attacks because he doesn't want to put his cup down because he can't open his hands. We're having to learn new methods of communication because, sorry, you have to stop hollering at me. But sometimes that's how he's communicating. He's communicating in the way that is comfortable for him to let me know, hey, this is what I want. So he might be indicating in a certain way. Like, he might be flopping, he might be stimming, he might be vocally stimming, he might be indicating in a different manner. Because sometimes when we have pain receptors going off, our body can't always cope and process with what's going on. And so there might be a lash out when, or he might be incredibly emotional or sensitive or touchy that day. It really is going to be a matter of communicating along the school and throughout the day. So, like, if he wakes up and he's struggling, then let that teacher know, hey, here's what we're experiencing today, so she can also be prepared. Or if you start to notice, we as parents, we pick up on things that our children do to indicate things for us. Like when Hunter has GI issues, he hits his stomach. Like, it's like he would stim like this, but he stims at his stomach. And when he does that, I know that's his indicator for, hey, this is bothering me. So on those days, if he has PT or OT or his nurse shows up, I can say, hey, here's what he indicated might be bothering him today. So just be on the lookout for that. And when we do that, that sets our service providers up for success too, because then they're prepared to help deal with what might be ailing our kids. Business services outside of the school makes sense. Let's see. Guide dogs can pass on. Oh, me. I would definitely follow up on it and don't let it get brushed under the rug. I'm sorry that you're receiving pushback. I don't, there's no excuse for that. And so I don't have an excuse for that. Continue to advocate. You sound like you are doing everything in your power to help provide resources to the school to get them what they need. I'm not a confrontational person by any means, but there's only so many times that you get to play with my child's education or my child's health, and then we're going to have a small problem, maybe a big problem. It just depends on how angry I get that day. My suggestion to you would be to ask for that IEP meeting and bring to the table all of these suggestions and say, we have to come up with a game plan because this child needs this support services. And there is clearly a need for it. If there wasn't a need for these types of vision services, you wouldn't be seeking the resources that you're seeking. Okay. Me and Sydney so plan to try to visit school. Definitely, Rosemary. If you have the means to be able to tap into those resources in those other areas, I would definitely recommend it because then you can see what it is that they have that they might be able to offer your child and trying to see how the school district can help support and bring that on board. All right, Miss Gretchen, is there a specific way to help the school and external therapists work together for a goal? For example, a communication goal. We use external speech therapy to complement her school speech therapy to work more with communication device. Got to get the device from insurance because the school would only provide one. Lamp, it's too small. And didn't offer the visual contrast she needed. Okay. So my suggestion would be to ask the speech therapist. Let me make sure. Yes, ask the speech therapist to the external speech therapist to give you a copy of their goals that they're working on at the external speech therapy. Bring that to your IEP meeting. I know that your speech therapist, your external speech therapist might not be able to come to the IEP meeting in person, but you can bring her contributions to the table and say, here's what we're working on externally with speech therapy. Can we correlate and align our services within the school district to go along with or complement what she's doing outside of school in external therapy? That's allowable. You can bring that to the team. The speech therapist that you're seeing externally should not have a problem offering you that care plan. They have to submit it to your insurance most likely anyways. So get that and bring that to the team and say, hey, here's what we're working on. Can we get some services that are going to be complement what we're working on outside of school and what we're working on at home and what we're working on in school? Okay. All right. Da, 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 da. Yes, Rosemary, it might be quite different where you're at. But I believe that some of the processes and maybe even some of the challenges and barriers that we face here, you guys might be facing there. And I want to say this too, because Ashley is also in special education, so I feel like she can absolutely vouch for this. There is an incredible teacher shortage. And there might be a warm body sometimes in the special education spot, but we might be lacking background knowledge in special education. You might have just sat through this training and now you know more than many of the SPED teachers that are servicing our children across the United States. So more similarities and differences from what I'm hearing from you. Well, great. Look at that. I was helpful. Any other questions, y'all? These have been great questions. Actually, I know we were trying to get it within a certain time frame. I feel like we have totally succeeded.
This is great. It was wonderful. This was great. The timing was perfect. The questions were great. Presentation was wonderful. Wonderful information for our families. All right. If there are no more questions, we can wrap up for tonight. But again, reach out to me anytime. Morgan and I would be happy to answer any questions for you. Morgan knows probably a way deeper understanding about due process and things like that than I do, just as a teacher, but we can tag team and try to help answer any questions or try to figure out what we can help you advocate for. So, all right. Thank you. Have a great night, everybody.
Y'all, thank you so much.
Thank you.